The opinions expressed on this program are solely those of its hosts, guests, or callers, and do not necessarily represent the opinions of WTBR-FM, its management, other producers, or sponsors.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM Pittsfield with Roberta McCulloch-Dews. Thanks for tuning in. So today we have with us Yina Moore. She is a founding executive and artistic director of the Adams Theater, which is currently under development to become a multifunctional arts and performance venue in Adams. Yina, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me here, Roberta.
Oh boy, it's been a day. But I just want to thank you so much for making the time and the space to have this conversation. I think you have such an interesting story because you are doing something that I think people probably have thought to do. You know, how many times someone says, if I had X amount of dollars, I would go and I would do this with this space. And what's fascinating to me is that you did it. You bought this space in 2021 and it's right now there's work happening to make it into what you want as a vision. And so we're going to get into the path that got you to that place where you purchased a theater. And you're doing this work. But I want to, as I do with all of my guests with Backstory, I'd like to set the stage a little bit to find out more about the person. And so you grew up in Shanghai, China.
That's right.
Okay, all right. And you were there until you were 18. So I always like to say, as someone who did not I was not born in this country, but I came here when I was 2. I don't have memories necessarily of Jamaica that I could tap into and say, oh, I remember this place or that. You know, my memories really go, they're reflected by my parents and family members. Tell me a little bit about life in Shanghai for you.
Wow. I think life in Shanghai for me was very interesting. The time that I grew up in the 80s and 90s also coincided the time when China was going through evolutionary change. And in the 80s, the society that I grew up with and the ones that I kind of finished college and going back, it was a totally different country. I find myself having to actually adapt every time I go back to China. And since I came to the U.S. As an 18-year-old average, I would say I went back maybe once a year before the pandemic. Even with that frequency, the change that happens both on the physical level from the city, from the people, as well as from an emotional, spiritual level, I think is just very big.
Tell me a little bit about those changes that you see and your response to it. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so where I grew up, my family is a multi-generational family living in a compound together, led by my grandmother. I had more memory of my grandmother because my grandfather passed away when I was younger. And my grandmother actually lived until the year of the pandemic. She lived until 99.
Wow.
And she speaks English, but she also did not have full-time job for the majority part of her life because she was looking after the children and family. And she has 6 children. And my uncles and Sundar family and my cousins, we all grew up together.
Yeah.
So can you imagine it's actually a very small, compound and, with probably 30 families. And our family has one unit within the larger kind of compound. And every one of the micro family in my family will have one room. And then grandmother will cook for all. So after school, after work, uncles, aunts, and myself and a bunch of the, siblings will get together to have grandmother's cooking. And there's a lot of chaos. I remember, I grew up wanting to escape. It was too much people all over each other's heads. Yeah,
Oh. I have one brother, and My grandmother's house, too, was the nucleus of a lot of things growing up for us here in New York. And her home was in Melbourne, in New York. And I do remember there's something to be said for that, just the family togetherness. It was my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-aunt. They lived in a house together, and at one point we lived downstairs. And I loved that. I always wondered how it would feel like to be a part of a large family, but you had that experience. And you're like, oh, no.
And we all share one toilet bowl. Oh, it's many people.
Well, that's closeness for you.
That's right.
But, it's okay. So I can imagine that there was always a lot going on. But what about the times like the holidays and the times of closeness? Did you find that you had this strong kinship with your family members?
Yes, not everyone.
Okay.
I mean, it's just the nature of human being can
That's
when you're
right.
so close.
Yeah.
But I have very my siblings. I just call them sisters.
Okay.
We really grew up together, and some of them I grew even closer as time go by, and some of them we don't. In China at the time was also going through social evolutionary changes, where the country is opening up, a lot of wealth started building, and eventually all these families, they all have their own individual micro family units. Everybody has an apartment, many of them in Shanghai, some of them migrated to other cities, some of them migrated to America.
Yeah.
And when I go back, we don't have this opportunity where everybody is together. We have to make appointment. Let's go to a restaurant, have a big banquet. I think that is rekindling of those experience growing up, enjoying every meal together. But it's changed.
Do you miss? I could see the pros and cons of that. Do you miss that closeness that you once had?
Oh, of course I do. Yeah.
And what about the future generations? Because when they're being brought up in something that doesn't even remotely look like something that you came up in, and so fostering that closeness while they're not living together, you have the banquets, you have things. How do you form different traditions to make sure that everyone stays together and still has the closeness of when you once lived in your grandmother's home?
I don't know from, kind of firsthand evidence, but from what I read, younger generation, from, what my observation of my nephew and niece, just seems like they're such isolated generation, and the pandemic make it even worse.
It's so different.
Yeah.
And you're right, the pandemic really changed a lot of our social behaviors in so many ways. If you were introverted, you probably became even more introverted. And if you weren't before, then you probably are a little bit now. And I think we're still trying to acclimate ourselves back into society and just the things that we used to do before. But yeah, forever changed. So, all right. So we have that background. Then you're in the States. You moved to the States, thinking about, all right, this is a clean slate. You have the freedom that you want. No more trying to jostle for the bathroom and different things. Was it everything that you thought it would be when you made that big move?
It was challenging when I first came to America, I had to say. I struggled quite a bit, both for the first year when I was in between high school and college, as well as the early years of college. For, part of me felt like I was in the right place. I wanted this freedom to be doing whatever I want to do for my life without, 20 other pairs of eyes looking at me every day. So part of it felt like I got what I wanted.
Yeah.
But, as a young person, you felt like, it's so far. Like the goal in your life is just so far, barely speak English that well. And how do I stitch together this dream? So that was a challenge.
Did you feel isolated and alone at times?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
How were you able to overcome that? Because obviously who you are today is not how you started out. So in those moments, what would you say are the things that kept you going?
Just set up smaller, achievable, intermediate, goals that actually I can fulfill. So at that time, it was, I was 18. I felt like, okay, I need to get into a U.S. college. And that's where I can find a community and continue my dream. So I had a situation in which so my parents came to America a little earlier than me, and I wasn't sure if I would be able to get my visa to come to the United States.
Yeah.
Given that situation, I went to go for my dream to become an architect as a high school student. So I got into a very, very good, maybe one of the best architecture schools in China as an 18-year-old.
Wow.
So I was about to go to college. And then I also got an opportunity to come and visit my parents on a visitor's visa. So I put my college kind of off for a year. I put it on a kind of 1 year, what do you call it, leave study.
Yeah.
You know, I know that a U.S. student does that a lot, but, you know, back in China, we didn't do that. So I came to the U.S., try to explore my parents' immigrant life. And then once I landed on soil, I have a 6-month visa. My parents says, well, why don't you just apply to a few colleges here? And if you land something and get a student visa, then you don't have to go back to China anymore. So that was literally, I accidentally kind of tripped into China, to the U.S. Yeah.
Was your initial reaction like, sure, or was it, wait, I have to think about this?
Well, it was sure, because, you know, just to go back a little bit, I actually went to a very, very good middle school, high school. It's a combined, you know, middle high. It's a state kind of sponsored school, but all the students started at the age of 11, learning English. People are fluent in multiple languages in my high school. So later on, I found out my high school in Shanghai actually produced a lot of kind of diplomatic material, you know, in China because everybody learned foreign languages growing up. By the time it was kind of in the 90s, many of such students, my classmates, they all got accepted by very good, reputable schools like Ivy Leagues and, you know, top liberal arts schools in the U.S. Yeah. But you kind of have to be in the know to know that my school actually has good recognition. You know, that's when China just opened up. Even just imagine if you're, you know, a U.S. college, you want to scout out students, you want to find the ones that's kind of like the feeder school. So I didn't know my high school was actually a feeder school to top U.S. colleges. Oh, wow. So the situation is I wasn't kind of the in crowd. So there are 12 students in my class got full scholarship coming to the U.S. And I came here to visit my parents. So that's how my journey kind of, you know, lined up for the U.S. So I came here, and 12 of my friends, including some of them very close friend, an ex-boyfriend from high school. So I called them up. I said, how did you guys do it? They were like, oh, do you know there's something called SAT? I was like, oh, really? So I actually did my SAT in the U.S. after I landed here, thinking that I was visiting my parents for 6 months. I'm not joking. Wow. So I was, you know, because I was kind of an arty kid. I was focusing a little bit more on the art stuff. I want to be an architect. You know, so I wasn't really paying attention to, you know, what else that's happening in the high school campus. So I was a bit isolated. But then my friends, the 12 people who end up going to very good schools ranging from Harvard, Georgetown, you know, Wesleyan. So these students are my friends. They say, you know, you can apply too. You're a good student in our class. So why don't you just apply the year after? So we're going to help you and guide you to get a scholarship. And that's how I ended up, you know, staying here.
You had good friends.
Well, yes. Yeah. After they got in the door, yes. That's right.
Oh, boy.
But during the year before, you know, everybody was in secret competition, apparently. For
again,
these,
because everyone kept it top secret.
Yeah.
Wow. But once they were fine, it was like, oh, okay. It's, you know, education, you know, the idea of education, it's so important. And again, you know, my children, they're first generation Americans. But again, even though I was little when I came to this country, I have a clear view of my parents as immigrants and the path that they took. And for my family, education was key, is key. Yeah. I saw tremendous sacrifices around education just to make sure that that was in place, not only for them, but just, you know, for my brother and myself. And exposure to those opportunities. And so I think, you know, I can't speak for all immigrants, but I do know that one of the prevailing thoughts that we had was that education is an equalizer. And so I do know that it creates a platform for so much. So you're here, you take the SAT, you're able to get into a really good college. I'm looking at your background and I'm like, there's finance, there's investment banking, and then there's architecture.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have passions that are on two ends of the spectrum. And so I do know that, even though you had that as your background, you ultimately went into investment services for your professional career.
Yeah.
Was that something that when you were an undergrad, you said, this is the path that I'm going to go into because it's lucrative and because I'm interested in it, or it's also a passion?
Yeah, that's good. I don't think it was a passion.
Yeah.
Finance. I didn't even know what finance is. I don't know what Wall Street is.
Yeah.
But I do have parents who they don't notice. When I was very young, I was very into the arts, and then a lot of parents worried, is she good enough in the arts to really make it, or if she has other talent, maybe there's some more pragmatic things that she can do. So I was always aware, that trade-off even before I left China. And then when you go into a new society, a new country, these trade-offs become even more because you don't want to take one wrong turn and then not being able to go the other way. And my high school, the one that I reminded you, I told you about. So when I went to Hamilton College, there was a girl. She was 3 years ahead of me. So she was a senior, leaving Hamilton when I was a freshman. She's like, you want to graduate, get visa, get stationed in this country, have a ground to stand out. There's only two jobs. You got to go to computer science or you study finance. Every other job is going to be a struggle for you to just get a green card. Because she was portraying a very realistic picture. Even years and years later, I went to architecture school. I work architecture internship. I still see students with very reputable education background and working in the architecture firm. And then the firm has a what do you call it, lottery policy, for example. So there might be 20. I'm just giving a number. 20 international employees who wanted to be sponsored for visa, and the firm has 4. And then they go through lottery process. But at the time when I graduated, which is 2003, if you land a job on Wall Street or tech, then it's almost guaranteed your company will sponsor you for green card. So that level of security, it's not just financial alone. It's really,
So there was a lot to it. Did you like it? Did you like finance?
So I always kept my door open for non-finance things. So I would do internships as such that, I will work in gallery at one term, and then I'll go work in, insurance company another term. I will go work for Merrill Lynch, and then I'll go work for an art firm. So I know that by keeping my options open for as long as I can always switch lanes later on. And I didn't give up on architecture. Actually, when I came to the U.S., took a year to do my SAT. I got into Cornell for its architecture program, which is, one of the best, for undergrad architecture. But I didn't go because Cornell didn't give me any money. So I went to the one that gave me the full scholarship, which is Hamilton College. So when I went to Hamilton, I found out their pre-arch program does exist. But it's not a real a trajectory to, it's not a Bachelor of Architecture program. So if I do take enough art classes, have my physics in play, calculus in play, I can always go apply for an architecture school for graduate as a graduate program. So that dream never died, actually.
It never died. So you kind of kept nurturing it. It was there.
Exactly. So, even when I started working on Wall Street, my colleagues were like, oh, so what's your plan? I'm like, I'm going to leave in 5 years and go to architecture school.
Did they believe you?
They believed it until 5 years later. They were, what happened to that plan? I'm like, oh, it's going to be happening another 5 years later. So... Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I did keep that dream alive. Yeah. So.
Okay. All right. So I get the sense that, the career in finance, it wasn't just the numbers, but it was everything. It was sort of this package deal. At the end of each day, did you feel satisfied though? Because there's the benefits, the angle, and there's the things that, make rational sense. And then there's the things that just make your heart say, I feel good about this. Because sometimes you have people say, I get into it and I hate it.
Right.
they're like, the hours, you can put a lot of hours into those kind of positions. And so did you find time to do anything else? Were you just numbers? I mean, yeah, you had architecture still nurturing that in the background.
Yeah.
But what was your life like? Were you still able to thrive and have your passions and find balance in those days?
Oh, thank you for this question. It's actually a very good question. I was satisfied until I was not. So for 10 years, for me in finance, I was able to create a life for myself that is very balanced from a creative and analytical kind of two sides of things. So my job is a research analyst. It's very intellectually satisfying. I work with very clever, smart people who are genuinely, intellectually curious and who are interested in nurturing me. So I really love doing research.
Okay.
And I love data. And then I was on the trading floor, so I was not expected to work on weekends. Oh. I think for the first 10 years of my finance job, I probably worked 10 weekends.
Oh, wow.
So that was very good deal. So I nourished my arts side on the side. I joined the boards of, a theater education company. I joined, every single museum's, young corporate, young associates board, so that I can stay, connected to the art world, and I take classes. So I was very balanced, for a while, and that also made it very hard to leave. When you have a good paying job and traveling around the world, what can change to make you want to go back to your passion, right? So for a while, I thought that this is it. Yeah.
Of course, you found everything, and then that something changed, and there was that you had this desire to say, okay, I'm going to make that shift. Was it something that, did you tell your parents? Did you talk to them? Did you say, I'm going to of course you're an adult and you can make your own decisions, of course. Yeah. But was it something like, did they say, are you crazy? What are you doing?
No, you have no idea. Even after I went into, got into Harvard Architecture School later on, I don't think my father was very happy at all. He was more proud of me when I was working on Wall Street. Yeah. He just, had this feeling that, what happened to my daughter? She's having midlife crisis. That's what he was, Yeah. Yeah. Is she having postpartum blue or midlife crisis? That's what.
Right. Because there's this, it's almost like you reach this pinnacle, and in their minds, they think, well, what else could there be?
Yeah.
How can you work so hard for this? Why would you make this change? But there was something that made you say, I'm going to take this leap. I'm going to make this decision. What was that something?
It was motherhood.
Okay.
Yeah, it was after I became a mother. Then it became very clear to me, with motherhood comes a lot of responsibility, and a lot of them I don't think I was prepared for. Many of us are not, right? And my life was kind of on this very delicate balance. I have my art, I have my work, I make everything work. I have a family. I got married. That even get to that point was a lot of struggle. A lot of relationship has to not work before something finally works.
I know.
And then all of a sudden you add another leg to it, which is motherhood. That's when I really lost my balance. Work was getting more intense, just right at that time, my particular role. And then I lost my entire leg of creative outlets. I can no longer do all these, museum classes or, events with the nonprofit that I was involved in, because my life was just motherhood and analytical work.
Yina,
Can
I just tell you how I just value your honesty right there and your transparency, because I've had so many conversations, and, I talk to so many women, and these are some of the recurring themes that come up. And, we hear in the mainstream, people always talk about having it all. And then they always like to caption the celebrities and showing that they have it all. And I'm like, you're not showing their nanny in the background or whoever, helping them. But, the working professional who is working outside the home, if you're a mom who stays at home, if you're a mom who works out of the home, you are working.
Yeah.
And balance can sometimes feel so far away. And it makes you question, It makes you question everything. And if you're doing everything right, the feelings of guilt, the feelings of so many things, and then you realize, what can I take off my plate?
Yeah.
What can I take off? Because something's not working.
Yeah. And then that makes you also ask question, what is more important, right?
Yeah. And so you realize that ultimately jobs will come and go. But then you have your children there forever. You're always going to be a part of you. And you make those decisions. And every day we see so many women, I'm just focusing on women right now. I'm not leaving the men out of it. But so many women make those choices because we have to. You made choices that were best for your life. And even though you knew that they were the right choice, tell me a little bit about the aftermath of that. And when you made the switch and then you found yourself, you said, okay, I'm going to focus. This is going to be my focus. What then? What next? What was that like for you?
I do have to bring the male perspective into the story a little bit here.
Please.
So I think what really helped me to make this leap of faith is still really my husband.
Yeah.
He really is has been encouraging from day one. I think he kind of used reverse psychology in this situation when I was telling him that I don't have my creative outlet. He said, you made a choice when you were 18 not to go to Cornell to do architecture. That at that time you had an excuse, okay, I don't have a green card, I don't have money, I'm struggling, my parents don't have green card. There's all these lists of things that you need security for. You need financial security, number one, you know, and legal status, immigrant status, all these things. He's like, what is your excuse now? What makes you not to want to do the leap? He's like, you're a lot wiser. You do have American green card. You have a much bigger bank account than you were when you were 18.
Yeah.
And you have a lot more life experience to offer, once you become an architect. So what's preventing you from doing it? It really was that thinking that makes me thought, wow, I'm actually much better prepared to do this than I was when I was 18.
So he had that belief in you. He saw that you could do it and sort of helped to just coax that out of you.
Yeah.
So, okay. So after with the support and the guidance of your husband, you said, okay, we're all right.
Yeah.
This is it.
But I also felt good. I'm like, okay, somebody's catching me when I'm falling, So, and, I have to set up a support network. When I kind of made that, I was a very planning-oriented person. I'm always, it's not just a leap of faith. I actually was working still on the trading floor. I enrolled myself in with a tutor to get me reacquainted with the field of architecture to see what is a good fit. Okay. There are many different ways of pursuing architecture. If I want to just be a design builder like what I am currently, and kind of a cultural developer, I didn't have to go to Harvard. There are other programs in which, much shorter, that I can learn some of the skills of real estate and development and get in and out faster.
Yes.
And with less tuition commitment. But at the time, I spent 6 months with tutor, redoing my portfolio, taking out all my sketches, drawings, put together things. And during that 6 months, I become more and more drawn every day to the readings that's assigned to me. And I like the intellectual components. I said, I don't want to do an 18-month program. At at Parson, I want to go for full-on architecture grad school experience with 3.5 years because I love the reading that was assigned to me.
Yeah.
And the tutor kind of helped me. He is an MIT architecture grad. He's like, well, I think you have the credential to do that too, even though you have been away from this passion for God knows how long, 15 years. But the reality is, in all these schools, they wanted people with diverse background. And among the people who aren't coming from a traditional architecture background, you really have the strongest resume. You have great undergraduate grades, you have a good portfolio. So that's how, at that same time, I was still doing work.
Yeah.
And you have no idea, work just became so boring. When I just want to go home and start doodling. So that's when, I gave it a time. I didn't want to jump in a situation that really made me look like a mother who's so desperate, wanting to get out of her life. But then I want to give it a time. And so between the time when I decided to make the switch to I finally make the switch, it's at least a year.
Wow.
And I have to work with my firm because I was pregnant with the second kid. So when I submit my application essay, I went into labor with my second kid. when I submitted my application package. Then I kind of lay back and look after, when my son Kenyon was born. And then I start getting all these schools, getting acceptance letters from all these schools. Then I talked to my firm. I said, look, I'm going on a different direction.
Yeah.
So let's talk about severance. So, so anyway, so I kind of really have to manage this entire process up until the last, until I get into school.
So there was strategy involved,
yes.
even in terms of the transition. Wow. Well, I would almost see that you would have to have strategy because, you have a family.
Yeah.
You can't just jump and say, okay, well, I'm just going to do this. It had to be methodical, but you are really methodical. You got a tutor. It's like, wow. But it just shows, I think, your thought process, though. And it shows just that you really wanted to make sure that if I'm going to take this leap, I want to do it well.
And I want to see what it's like, whether I enjoyed it or not, so. Because there are many other leaps I could have taken. I can, within the finance world, I can choose a new path. I can choose a new job. If I'm stuck in a situation, a product that is going to be replaced by robots soon, I can always find other roles in finance. But at the time, I just thought that my leap was pretty far. And before I make such a far leap, I should probably collect some evidence that I'm going to enjoy it before I do it.
So when you were in, and I just want to, just let my guests know who are just tuning in right now that I have Yina Moore. She's the founding executive and artistic director of the Adams Theater. And again, the Adams Theater is in Adams and it's currently under development. You may have seen it as you pass by through that area. And it is destined to be a multifunctional arts and performance venue. So more to come and more to see on the Adams Theater as it continues to develop. But right now we're talking to Yina, and we're just talking a little bit about her pathway from finance to architecture, which was very strategic and methodical. I don't think I could have put a path together that was so itemized as you have done. But I guess it just shows again that step-by-step thinking. When you were now immersed, you said goodbye, bye-bye finance, thank you, I have my package, goodbye. And you get into the realm of architecture. You immerse yourself in your studies. Did you set the scene a little bit? What did you see around you? Did you also see? I have to ask. Did you see other women of color there? In these classes. What did it look like? Was it very diverse? I don't know.
In architecture school?
Yeah.
It's very diverse from a racial standpoint. From the gender balance standpoint, very, very. I think our class probably had a lot more women than men. That's just
really?
my feeling. Yeah.
Oh.
But there's also a saying in the architecture world that why is it that there is equal amount, if not more, women in a class of architecture school, but all the architects that made it to the top are male? We have those discussions, and it's actually very common. Even I think who look back 20 years ago. Our women architecture students are abundant, but many of them also somehow left the career or didn't make it to the principals of the firm or star architects.
Why do you think that's the case?
Now that I joined the field a lot later, I was 35 when I started my architecture career. A lot of students are 25. I can see that becoming motherhood. Just imagine putting them in my shoes, suddenly you become a mother and then you have an architecture career and a motherhood. And I know how demanding that career is. Just imagine in my situation, my finance career, I was shuttered. I had. So, I believe that career path is also very, very challenging for people who wants to spend extended amount of time in office and having children.
Got it. So almost like they go through the studies, they do all of that. But then when faced with decisions like, let's say they do want to have a family, then they're like, okay, they have a family and they may not come back.
Yeah. or they come back in a slightly different capacity. Because when you study architecture, there are a lot of things you can do.
Yeah.
You can be consultant. You don't have to be architect with the capital A. You can do, development. You can do other type of design thinking works.
Yeah.
That maybe some of them demands a little less, in terms of personal time. I don't know.
What do you think? How would we, in terms of shifting that pattern, what do you think that the industry will need to be able to accommodate women who want to return and not and be that principal and be able to do that? Are there changes within the industry that need to happen, or do you foresee this as something that will just continue to happen because it's just kind of like, women will have to make these decisions on their own?
I think people have to talk about statistics. They have to, by the time I left architecture school, I left my last internship that is with a typical architecture firm. I'm seeing changes. There are a lot more women rising up, women getting promoted to become principals or partners of architecture firm. There are a lot more architecture firm whose namesake is female. But we need to kind of reposition our thinking. This is possible. And then kind of shifted the tide a little bit. But first of all, we have to talk about it. Why is this happening? And historically, traditionally.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the P word, possible, because you are doing a lot of things that, again, I think I started out the conversation by saying there are a lot of times people say, I want to do that. I want to do that. And you did something that you made something possible. You purchased this shuttered theater.
Yeah.
It was for over a decade. And you purchased this back in May of 2021, and you had a vision for it. You, armed and equipped with your knowledge and your expertise in architecture, you were ready to go. Did you, when you left your studies and graduated and did all that, did you say, I have a vision, I know what I am going to do, I want to be an owner and I want to do certain things, and ownership and revitalization will be a part of it? Or was the theater revitalization something that was not necessarily in the plan, but a welcome addition?
Yeah, it was totally not in the plan. It's a welcome addition. Yeah. It really is a very serendipity kind of situation. I was panicking when I left grad school. My husband told me, you just have to let it go. Don't be so tight. Just let the fate, just enjoy school and let the answer find you. That's kind of his message for me. But I couldn't, I was a bit uptight. I left the school. I was like, okay, what's next?
Again, you are the woman who hired the tutor to plan your next step. So I could definitely see the panic.
Yeah. And then I thought that doing work with design development is something that I'm very interested in. But with the financial capacity I had, I was like, maybe I can find a gallery to work at. Maybe I can go to a small suburb in New York to find a little venue. I always thought venue, whether it's multi-use venue, some multi-use with like a cafe, on the lower floor. I always thought about having something to do with art, something to do with hospitality. I didn't know what would that be, but I thought maybe I can pick a small project. But before I even do that, I went back to architecture firm. I worked for a firm for 6 months when I was planning on, when I start my firm of design build, what would it be called? What would it be? I actually registered my firm when I was working for the architect, in New York City, trying to pick up some skill that I didn't get to pick up when I was an architecture student. So during those 6 months, I guess in one summer, I was like, okay, husband, I'm ready. I'm ready to leave this office and start my own office. And when I made that announcement to myself, I didn't even have a client. And then a month later, Tom Krantz found me. He is the person who got me involved in the Berkshires. So it just, it sounded like very random. Okay, for the first time, Yina actually quit a job without having a plan. I actually do have somewhat a plan. So when I was at Harvard in the last year, I did a project in the studio. The professor was a visiting professor from China as an architect. He told us that the design that we have created is selected by one of his clients in China, and he's going to take design that came out of our studio that me and my student partner Wilson did will be erected in China as a cultural center.
Yeah.
And then my husband, again, he encouraged me. He's like, Yina, look, you wanted to start your own firm. How wonderful would it be just to have a project to start in China? So if you wanted to quit your job anyway, this is the time. Spend 3 months in China, follow your professor, and see that museum gets erected. And then that will be part of your, starting portfolio kind of work. So I decided that I'm going to leave my job and at least see that work complete. And then the professor called me and say, hey, I used to have a client named Tom Krantz. He is in some need of help in Berkshire with his architecture model and railroad museum. And he's looking for some architecture consultant. I can be there for him. Do you mind spending 2 weeks just talking to him before you come to China? So my North Adams trip was really a detour. I was supposed to go there just to talk to Tom for 2 weeks before I go to Beijing. I had tickets bought and then to finish seeing that museum getting built. So I detoured to North Adams. I go, okay, so I pick up 2 clients instead of 1. How bad could it be? I had no idea, who Tom was. I obviously Googled him. I know he was the visionary founder of Massmoke and all that, and Guggenheim. So I was like, wow, maybe that would not be a bad client to have either. So I came to North Adams for 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, Tom made a proposition to me. He says, why don't you take my project as your principal project? You want to go to China to see the cultural center getting finished? Great. Why don't you go there for 3 weeks, but spend more time on my project? I need you more. So that's how I ended up stayed. I ended up did go to China, and that cultural center was built. I was only there for 2 weeks, seeing part of the construction. Yeah. So
tell me where. All right. So
yeah, it's really sounds.
But there's that serendipity kind of thing because that it's almost like the pieces were fitting together. When you first saw the Adams Theater, what did you think?
Yeah. So I thought, wow, I could have a Tom project. That's how, I was spending so much time with Tom.
Yeah.
And his thinking absolutely influenced me, especially he liked to talk about early Massmoke stories, which is a revitalization project, right? Empty building. So when I saw Adams Theater, it was a building project to me. It's an empty building, love for the trust. I was very well aware of the Mohawk Theater in North Adams. When I was working for Tom, we did research on that together. So I knew that through a little bit of research, Adams Theater and Mohawk were like sibling theaters. Yeah. They were built around the same era. So when I first saw the building, it was just struck me as this amazing structure that I felt like I can improve. And then I learned the story of Nana Sinopoulos and Karen Hyman, who owned the theater, owned the Adams Theater before me. It was called Topia Arts Center, and they've already put in 17 or 18 years of love into it. So they have done a lot of mold remediation and certain improvements, stripping down certain components that are not working. So compared to Mohawk Theater, I felt it's actually an easier project for a newbie like me.
Yeah.
So I just, it was another serendipity moment. I wanted to do a cultural project. I found out about the Berkshire, knowing that my little dream of working on a small gallery, maybe in Rockaway, New York, actually can be done on a much bigger scale, in this place. So that's how everything.
Isn't that something though? You talked about look how your vision was. And you are listen, you have great plans for yourself, but even in that moment, you thought, okay, maybe like a little gallery or maybe something. This far exceeds that. Forget little gallery. This is yours. You know what I mean? And, look how it exploded. What you had, that initial vision for yourself, really has manifested into something that is so beyond.
Yeah.
It's so much bigger.
Yeah. And all the education I had in, visual arts and the volunteer work that I've done consistently in my finance years, I was working on the board of a theater education company called Opening Act. I was on the board for 5 years. I mean, I didn't even know what I was doing these for. I had zero theater, background, but a friend of mine kind of convinced me to join the board as the youngest member. Yeah. But all these work somehow leads to something. So I just felt that, oh, wow, this is a project where a lot of my background and skills and life experience can really add value to it. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit, because I always like to say that there's the in-between and there's the start of the vision, because now that, once you came on board and said, okay, I'm going to take this project on, I'm going to make it my own. And obviously we know that the end of this will be when it comes to light in the glorious fashion that you want it to. There's this in-between, and it's in the in-between that we have our takeaways, that we learn and things that we're like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. Tell me a little bit about some of the things this experience has shown you. I mean, there might have been things that there's always the knowledge that you gain in grad school, and then there's the boots on the ground, when you're in it, kind of knowledge and insight that you're able to glean from. What are some of those things that you have taken from this experience working with Adams Theater?
I have to segue into something else, but in order to answer your question, I hope I have time for it. So I think in order to do these things, there are a lot of moments. Like I have 3.5 years as a student, a mother student. I could have just said, I'm going to focus. This is my mother time. This is my student time. I'm shutting myself down to all the other distractions. But I actually, during those 3.5 years at Harvard, I did a work study in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. Oh. And that work study had significant influence on my thinking of the work that I do. Back to your first question, where are you from? Shanghai, New York. I have zero connection with the countryside. I always see myself as a city girl, and I'm afraid of mosquitoes. I'm still not, a countryside friendly person. But how did that all happen? When I was in Rotterdam doing this architectural kind of urban design research, I was working under Rem Koolhaas, a thinker, architecture, urban thinker, who's doing a research for the Guggenheim Museum in New York. Really looking at the world through the lens of the countryside. What he defined as countryside as anywhere non-urban, because he likes to make big predictions. He has huge convictions. And then the research ultimately kind of culminated into an exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. But we were looking at the non-urban place in the world, from its political, technological, agricultural, environmental, every single aspects, and showing the discrepancy between what is happening in non-urban places and urban places, and causing a lot of, social instability, for example. And then I was assigned a particular research job, and I think I did a really good job with it. Then I started to become interested. So my thesis actually at Harvard is about that. It's about examining a particular non-urban kind of phenomena situation. I didn't want to go too much into elaboration. But in the age of technological advance, in the age of what increasing wealth gap, in the age of divergent political opinions. So my project, my thesis project, is actually what got me But at the time, it was all theoretical, right? So when I remember this conversation I had with Tom, I'm like, I'm so glad I discovered about the Berkshires. Everything I was doing since my latter year in architecture school, I'm kind of working on it, hands-on, like even with Tom on the project that he was working on, the architecture museum. And Tom says, you found it fun theorizing things. You're going to have so much more fun working in the trenches. Yeah. I remember that conversation. And that's, I think that's the pivot moment for me, is that all these things that, I've kind of segued into, I got dragged into through architecture discovery, somehow find its meaning when you're working the trenches. So
because there's the book smarts that we have, and then there's when you're in it and you're like, okay. And sometimes there's perfect alignment, and then there's sometimes you're just like, I did not see that one coming.
Right, I did not. But my point is back to your question is if you keep your mind open and absorbent, so you just don't know where it's going to manifest it at, you know.
Absolutely. And you obviously kept your mind open because, I mean, look what happened. You now have this wonderful, wonderful building that you are continuing to put a lot of attention and great work into. So it can be a key feature in Adams. Tell me a little bit about the support that you have received from the community so far in regards to just, I mean, I've seen a couple of things. I know that there's been a buzz. There's a lot of articles written about the Adams Theater, about you. So there's definitely that love. Have you heard from the community people? Have you heard from them? What are they saying?
I think the support from the community people ought to be earned, not get, from get-go. I would say that in the very beginning, when I put these renderings of the theater facade on a Facebook, you're going to have people say, oh, what is this? Is she trying to make our little cute downtown into Brooklyn? I had definitely heard comments, and I have people calling me on the phone, leaving me a message, say, can you please don't change the facade of the theater to become what you have rendered, and then the people commenting on the font that I use. So in the beginning, there are a lot of naysayers, and some people out of good intentionality say, oh, a theater in Adams would never work because of A, B, C, D, E. So I just kept a very open-minded approach. If everybody criticize on something that I was doing, I just say, can you tell me what would you suggest that's better? Do you want to come in for a look? I invited the very people who criticized me into the theater, say, if you don't think this ought to be a theater, so what would you make it be? I think sometimes people really just want their voice being heard. They don't know if they're right or if I'm right, but being able to be included in this conversation, I think I turned a lot of negative naysayers into supporters, actually, that way.
Excellent approach.
Right?
Yeah.
And then small town, words go really fast.
Yeah.
And then when people know this person is open-minded and approachable and listen to ideas. And then, again, you have the people who are just having decades of experience with downtown Adams. Everything gets promised, but nothing gets done. Then I know very soon I have to show some results.
Right.
Big or small, I have to show results, being transparent about it, where we deliver, where we don't.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the spirit throughout this whole project is just to let people know what is going on. And that, I think, really helped me get great support,
Well, I think the approach that you have taken is quite commendable, and it's so smart because these are small communities, and people do talk. They talk a lot, and because they talk about things that matter to them. They talk about, they grew up here, and they have many times. A lot of people have fond memories. They remember it when it was this or when it was that, and and so these conversations are backed by the people who have sort of this history. And so I think, being, like you said, being open-minded and being able to receive these conversations goes the distance. And I know that people appreciate that a lot. I have to ask, when you're not doing this work, what are you doing in your quote-unquote downtime? Does that even exist?
Yes, it does.
But what do you like to do?
I really like just watching my kids.
Okay.
Talking to them.
Okay.
Finding out every day, what ticks them. What I spend a lot of time talking to my husband.
Yeah.
Because now for this work, they are spending more time in New York. I spend time here.
Right. Yeah.
So I do lots of long drives. So I try to. I know that I didn't have time to read, so I do a lot of audibles. And then when I get back home, just try to be a follower.
Yes.
Because in my household, I'm not a leader. When I'm not around, Alan gets everything arranged and organized in ways that when I come back home on a Thursday, I kind of have to take a minute to say, okay, what can I do to help? And what did I miss?
Yeah.
So I find that actually very, very helpful for me.
Okay.
Because it's, I know that the other part of me has to rise up
Yes.
to meet the family challenges, and then it kind of pushed me to stay away from the day-to-day Adam stuff. Yeah.
Right. So you have that split.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But not I wouldn't pretend that every week is easy. There are weeks that I can just unplug from one thing and go to another, and but I'm adapting.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's that space, again, giving yourself that space and that grace to, one, acknowledge that you're doing something that's huge.
Yeah, and also another thing that I really enjoy, I think it's very healthy for my mental space, is that I do miss architecture design and design in general. And design is a very slow-paced thing. You take 2 hours to do something you can actually do in 10 minutes because you want it to be perfect. You want to fudge. You want to do little things. And then in running the theater project, you want to do something that's 2 hours in 10 minutes and then pass the rest to your teammates and stuff like that. So I find little parts of the Adams Theater project that I can spend 2 hours to do 10-minute things.
Yeah.
So that way that my artist self gets to be exercised, whether it's designing a little poster or finding a moment to design an architecture element.
Yes.
I can't do that for the whole project anymore.
Right.
But I try to find these little moments I can latch on to.
I totally get it, because you are the leader. You have to sort of oversee all of these things.
Yeah.
So but still allowing your creative energy to tap into those small things, it gives you life.
Yeah, I steal some time from myself just to do these things,
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I know our time is winding down, but I want to ask 2 more questions or so. Who would you say, who or what inspires you to keep going? And it's an open-ended question. You may have more than one person or more than one thing, but what is your inspiration as you traverse this path?
The female characters in my family. I mentioned about my grandmother who passed away when she was 99, and I have 2 grandmothers who basically were raised families on their own. My grandfathers, for various situations, they couldn't really contribute as much. And these grandmothers, my other side of the grandmother, my mom's mom, was even illiterate and raised 4 children by herself, working as somebody who does laundry, for a bank in China. And then they were so constrained with their education opportunity, with their society, the role in the society, yet they can do so much for their family. And then my mother too. My mother is a more family-oriented person. She's not as career-oriented as I am. But just her level of dedication, the reason why I can do all this is because she's home right now, looking after the kids, helping my husband to do bedtime stories, But these female characters, my mom and the 2 grandmothers, they amplify their giving to the family. One of my grandma have a family of 6 kids, the other have 4. But I am just so much more empowered, with my education, with my this. I felt like I can empower the village. I'm just joking, but I felt like, I can be amplified.
Yeah.
They can do a lot for their family and let them ride on her support, right? So, and I think that's a very, even if you were to say maternal thing, the ability to take care and to facilitate,
Can I just say how beautiful that was? Yeah. Because the strength of the women in your family, and you speak about them, you speak about the ambitions and maybe what they were able to do in their life, and look what you are doing. The dreams and the desire for more that has been passed on for generations. You're living it.
Yeah. But I'm giving also so much more tool and resources than they did, right? They never was able to, exercise what I do. So if you had to choose one word to describe you, what would that be? Word?
Yeah, one word. One word to describe you.
Passionate.
You said that with such conviction. Yes, but you are passionate. I just want to take the time right now to thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for opening up and sharing your background. And, now that when I pass the Adams Theater, I'm going to look at it in such a different light, because I'm going to say, I know the woman, but I know a little bit more about the woman who is a driving force in making sure that that theater comes back to its glory. So I just want to thank you today for a great conversation, and I want to thank all the listeners for tuning in, and so I just again hope everyone has a good day, and thank you. So everyone, you've been listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on 89.7 WTBR-FM with Roberta McCulloch-Dews. Thank you again, and have a great day.